called the school committee for Thursday, October 12th, 2023 to order. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Great. First of all, I want to recognize Westwood Media Center, which is live streaming the meeting and is also recording the meeting later for later viewing. Anyone else looking to record the meeting? Great. Seeing none, I will turn it over to the superintendent for his report.
Thank you, Tony. So there are a number of things on the superintendent's report this evening. I want to start off with a conversation. We talked about this a little bit at September's school committee meeting around comprehensive facilities planning. You know, I've been going around, I've been doing my entry plan conversations around the district. I'm really grateful and thankful for all the people that have come out. I've finished all four of the sort of public meet and greets, and was great to hear from people in the community. Then I have one of my school visits left. I was at this week, I was at the high school yesterday, I was at Downey earlier today, and I'll be at Martha Jones next Thursday, and we'll run through that. At the same time, there are some things that are clearly apparent early that I don't think we need to wait for November's report, my entry plan report, to kind of get the ball moving on those. And one of those is certainly in the area of facilities. I mean, my sort of introduction to this started even before my official first start date on July 1st, when we had a capital subcommittee meeting at the end of June that I joined at that point in time. We talked at that point about our needs at Sheehan from a roofing perspective. We talked about our needs at Thurston as it related to roofing and HVAC. We talked about our needs at the high school as it relates to roofing just by natural age of the building. What we don't, as I talked about in September, what we don't currently have is a plan for how we think about these in a holistic way from a long-term perspective, or a plan that has an educational vision and component at its core. For me, the most fundamental thing about our school buildings is how they either support or in some cases inhibit the kind of learning that can take place inside of them. And so it is crucially important that if we talk about, you know, roofs and windows and boilers and building systems, it's kept with that educational mission and focus at the center of that work. The last study that we did as a district was in 2015. As I share in the memo that I wrote to the committee, there were two main next steps identified following that study in 2014-15. I know the committee has this, but I'll share this with the public that are here. One was appropriate funds for further study of the Hanlon site for a potential new elementary school. And two was develop a strategy for preparing the SOI, statements of interest, to request eligibility into the MSBA grant program. Those steps were exactly what were followed and what has led to Pine Hill opening this February. Right, so it shows the value and importance of actually having a plan, executing the plan, and what that can mean for kids and families and the community as a whole. So I think the time is right to entertain this path, and I want to thank Lemma for her support in really helping me understand the complexities of some of our systems, as well as Tom Carey. I want to give credit to Tom as well. And so the time is right to do this. I think there are two things at play here. One is my recommendation would be to have the capital subcommittee really work at developing an RFP so that the time is right and that we can strike if and when funding becomes available. And the second thing that I'll share this evening, which folks may or may not know that conversation is out there, but I watched last night's select board meeting, and there was a conversation at the meeting last night about calling for a special town meeting in regards to the fire station. And so I'd want some feedback from both the capital subcommittee and the committee as a whole about, do we want to be positioned to potentially be a part of that special town meeting warrant? And I'm seeing some nodding of heads even as I'm saying that statement right now. But it means the time is potentially of the essence to get us ready for that process. So there is not a tangible sort of like visual presentation update, because this is about the conversation about being prepared to execute that. But again, given the timing of the conversation, the community as a whole, it didn't make sense to wait until November to have this conversation this evening. So happy to entertain any feedback from the committee on this particular item.
No, I think that's, well, it's a great summary. We're not surprised at your finding. You know, Sheehan has always been at the forefront, at least of my mind, since we started the process. And I do think that we need to, one of the subcommittee's goals was to come up with some sort of working plan, strategic plan going forward. So I love the idea of an updated capital plan maybe they can, or, capital needs study. Maybe they can take what we have and, we can kind of look at the cost efficiency there as opposed to starting from scratch. But I do think that the time is right for it, particularly with the needs we know we have at Thurston, the needs at Sheehan, and now things here are starting to pop up. So I think this is definitely the right direction, and, we can certainly, the subcommittee can certainly set up a meeting to kind of move this forward along with you. I also think the special election is an interesting opportunity for the schools as well, because, and we should talk more about that. But no, I think those are sort of my initial thoughts.
Agreed. That's what we've talked about. Yep.
Okay. Thank you for that. Speaking more broadly about capital planning, I don't know, actually, Lemma, you and I didn't talk about, do you want to take the component here just around the schedule and budget request for capital planning, or do you want me to
Sure,
take
I mean, I can just comment briefly and say that we are asked annually by the town to present a 5-year capital outlay schedule. So we prepared that and are sharing with you this document, which kind of it's very difficult to think 5 years out sometimes, but this is our best attempt at forecasting what our needs would be. One thing I might highlight about this when you look at the numbers is that we try to smooth the impact on the town finances of our requests. So we try to anticipate, overall what projects are coming up, but not necessarily in our annual capital changing our requests dramatically. So you'll see kind of steady requests in all of the different line items, because that's partly an intentional strategy to not ask for a big change in our annual capital allocation year to year. However, there are some other capital article requests that might be, important. So those would be town articles that we would have to then proceed and discuss it further. So these are just anticipating needs, specifically at Thurston, where we talk about HVAC and roofs. We've also got the facilities master plan, which we just discussed, and the Sheehan building project. So those are some of the key items that are listed here.
Yeah, I'll kind of share publicly the number related to Sheehan, which is an updated number as part of the FY25 budget presentation, or at least budget preview in a little bit. I will say, in terms of where we put that on the calendar, we just put it someplace to put it someplace. There was not necessarily a strategy of putting that someplace on the calendar with submission. But this is as Lemma mentioned, this is a little different than how we've approached this in the past. Through our conversation with municipal officials, there was an ask about, we don't want to have any surprises, so tell us what you know is on the radar. So we told them what we knew was on the radar.
Yep.
And that's the way that this was submitted this year. So.
Yeah, maybe one last thing to highlight is that in the narrative, which is very lengthy, I reference a few times that we have a study that should be coming out soon by Sims Maney that's more of an engineering study and a look at our systems, and that will inform how we sequence projects in the coming 5 years. So we're looking to that report to be released soon, and certainly any master plan would then inform bigger decisions, strategic ones that affect our buildings.
Okay, but if there are any questions, we're certainly happy to entertain those as well too. But
I think it looks good.
And
I like seeing it all out there.
Yeah, that's helpful.
I know it's conceptual. I know we've talked about this, but I do want to maybe dive deep, maybe in an executive session on the security piece and I know we've done a lot there, but also I know there's things on our to do. So maybe at some point we'd love to dive deep on those.
I want to echo that. I think it might be helpful because we did that audit, right? And we had those results in an executive session. It might be helpful to have another executive session to figure out where we are now. I think it's been 2 years, right, since we did that. So a follow-up, I agree. I think a follow-up session would be really helpful.
yeah, and I do want to, again, this is a place I want to give Lemma credit, is that previously security itself wasn't listed on here.
Yeah.
It was sort of tucked into building improvements, so we made an explicit change to number 4 on this list to call it building improvements and security, to make sure that was highlighted in that regard.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks. Next item on the list is I want to give a little update around extended day. As I mentioned, I've been doing a lot of community listening as part of my entry plan. This is a topic that has come up on a very regular basis. I know this committee, certainly prior to my arrival, has heard the concerns from residents around extended day as well too. And what I see as I talk with families are really two major challenges related to, or two major issues related to the way that extended day is currently operating and done. The first of those is something that we own as a district, and that's what our registration process looks like. And as I've said to families who have expressed concerns, and rightful concerns about our registration process, is that if we are a district that truly believes in equity, then a family's access to extended day shouldn't be determined by who can sit in front of a computer screen at the exact moment in time. That does not seem to be consistent with that value that we uphold as a district. So I can say this evening very clearly that we are committed to revamping the registration process. I do not yet know what the results of that revamping will look like. That's some of the work that we need to do. But we also need to do that work in a manner that there is enough lead time for families to know what that process looks like, to know how that process is conducted, to be transparent about that process. You know, as I was talking with a set of parents the other day, and the kind of phrase I kept coming back to is as families, you need to know what the rules of engagement are with our program. And so we need to be clear about that, and that's some of the work that we need to do. And so we absolutely own that. The second issue that has arisen, though, and is clearly there, is that there is a significant issue with capacity in the community for after-school care. I think one of the things that as I've talked with people that is not necessarily known or absorbed, and some of that is certainly on us from our communication, is that we have an upper limit on what we can provide for capacity in our programs. Some of that is related to staffing, but a lot of that is related just simply to building footprint, the kinds of spaces we can use, and the fact that the rules and regulations that govern after-school care are different than the rules and regulations that govern in-school school. And so we have capacity limits on the size of what our programs can be as a result of that. That being said, there are also very few other options in town for after-school care, and that is a challenge. And you know, we are willing to sort of help support where we can, but that is a problem that is bigger than ours, just as a school district. Now, people are pointing to us, and understandably so, because the kids are with us in school, because we run our after-school program. And as I have said to people that I've met in the community, if anybody has an entrepreneurial spirit, has some space and wants to set something up, and if we can get kids there, and there are also rules about what we can do. You know, I had a family reach out to me about a program in Dedham, in a nearby community, and could we get the kids there? And we can't legally transport kids across town lines to something that isn't our program, right? So there are, again, limits on what we are bound and able to do. But where we are able to support this, we can. But this problem is bigger than just resting on our shoulders. So I hear and feel the concern of families and families that need care because they don't have other options. And I feel badly because I don't have great answers for those families, and I know none of us really do right now. But as I've shared, there is our mission as a school department does not include after-school care, but our mission as a broader community includes thinking about and how we support our residents, right? And so I think that's part of the conversation that, again, is sort of beyond our scope here. I want to reinforce our commitment to ensuring a more equitable registration process going forward. I don't want to bury that in the last conversation, but that is something we are committed to doing, and doing it early enough so that families can plan for what things will look like next fall. So happy to answer or entertain any comments from the committee.
So I know you've had a lot of conversations with parents. I think many of us have. So thank you for taking the time to do that and to hear folks out. As you know, I was sort of on the working group last year to address this, and taken some time to update you on that. So I think you've identified the two biggest issues. And I'll kind of be excited to hear more kind of as time goes on with respect to what we'll do with the registration process. I also just wanted to point out, another sort of underlying factor here that maybe isn't known to the community, which is how much of a drain this is on your staff, right? And I think that takes away from other things you could be doing. And it needs to be a consideration in terms of how we move forward.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
I know we've set rates for extended day through this year?
This year.
So
Mhm.
we need to look at the rates on a going forward basis.
Mhm.
I think we agreed to look at them year over year.
Yeah.
Yes, for
And-
now. Yeah.
And do we have any sense of whether it's self-sustaining at this point?
We designed the budget so that it should be. I anticipate that we would be, able to break even
Right.
this year. Yeah. Last year we ran a small deficit,
Okay.
so that was a problem.
Yeah, and I think related to that, I mean, my understanding is that even though we raised rates, it didn't diminish demand at all. And speaking sort of historically, right, going back, and I don't remember exactly what the year was, but having just read through that 2015 master plan report that talked about one site for extended day. So at least as recently as that, there was only one site for extended day, and now we're at 4 with a large wait list. So the demand has just increased exponentially in the community, at least over the last 8 years. Next item on the report is our quarterly financial update. So,
This one is a brief one, I would say, because we are in Q1. So it's relatively early in the year, but some of the highlights here, I've shared a memo with you and you can read in detail, but I just wanted to flag that if we compare our spend rate this year to last year, there's a roughly $2 million gap. So we are spending more slowly than where we were last year at this time. And that's explained by the fact that we've only issued 2 paychecks to teachers, and teachers do comprise the majority of our budget. So their salaries are 65% of the budget. So that's that number. In terms of salaries, I would highlight overall, we've budgeted appropriately for our staff, what we needed for our classrooms. This year, we did need to hire 1 aide in a kindergarten classroom that we opened at Martha Jones. We continue to see the same issues in terms of retention of support staff, particularly in positions like instructional aides, food service staff. These are the roles that we've had trouble retaining people in, so we do continue to see turnover in these positions. In non-salary expense areas, I would say our contracted service line and student services we're doing much better on this year, but it gets very early, so I wouldn't get too confident there. There's been a trend of us going over budget, and last year we were 112% over budget at this time. This year we're 8% over budget. They do encumber everything, assuming they plan for the whole year, so they set up the POs. So when I say we're over budget, it's not that it's all spent, but we expect to be 8% over budget. So that's where we are in that line, and I give a lot of credit to the Student Services Department for hiring, because the chief driver of the overage last year was the fact that we had to use contractors for vacancies. So we've done a much better job this year of filling those positions. In one other area, transportation, we are a little bit over budget. I'll talk more about that during the presentation today, but that was due to some busing for ESY. And that's about a $20,000 overage. Tuitions are on budget. They have shifted, so our tuitions are not going to the same schools that we anticipated they would be going to, but we are roughly on budget in terms of tuition. And the last thing I would say is that special education continues to be an area where we anticipate volatility. So, that's it.
Any questions from them? I just want to thank you for the revamped report. It was much appreciated.
Just the last thing I want to say as part of the superintendent's report this evening. It's not formally on the agenda, but nor would it have been at the time that we set the agenda. But I want to take a moment this evening as I've continued to reflect over the events of the past week. It is undeniable that the world witnessed heinous acts of terror and inhumanity. And on behalf of the Westwood Public Schools, we join the rest of the world in mourning the innocent lives that were lost and those that are still in peril. We also know that continued violence and unrest in the region are having a profound impact on many of our families here in the Westwood community, who are looking for solace and support from us as a school department to know that their children are protected and safe from harm. And as I think about my message to the community on Tuesday, I talked in general about our need to care for our students across the district, provided resources that families could use at home, and pointed to additional support in the school and the community. But as I've reflected on that message as well, what was missing was a clear statement of my core values, the core values of our district, and how our focus on upholding those values provides protection for our students. And so I want to rectify that this evening. You've heard me say this before, but it's my most fundamental core value that we all have a collective responsibility for all of our students, and all means all. And it's our district's core value that we have respectful relationships and a caring and collaborative community where every student is safe and every student can learn. As superintendent, it's my responsibility to ensure that we remain steadfastly committed to ensuring that these values are realized in the work that we do every day with students and with staff. We're dedicated to anti-bias and equity training for our staff, as well as structured learning opportunities for our students that promote perspective taking and ethical reasoning. And while these efforts strengthen the protective factors for our students, we also need to remain vigilant in identifying any instances of anti-Semitism, hate, and discrimination. There is no place for this in our schools, period. Our most important responsibility at this moment is to ensure that the children in our care feel safe and supported by everyone here in Westwood and in our public schools. And we ask parents that if your child is feeling worried or if you're worried about your child, please know that we are here for you and we are ready to help. Again, I say this after reflection over the last week. I'm going to be sending this message out to families across the district because I know not everybody is here or watching this evening, but I felt it was too important not to be unsaid tonight. So,
Thank you. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, Tim.
Okay, that's all on the superintendent's
all on the
thing? All right,
superintendent's report.
time for public participation. As a reminder, this is the opportunity for members of the public to provide input to the school committee. Per our policy, you have up to 3 minutes to speak. We just ask that you speak your name and your address. And per our policy, the school committee does not, while we appreciate the input, we don't directly engage with or on these topics. So saying that, is there any member of the public that would like to come forward and participate during the public participation? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to school committee chair update, liaison reports. A few updates, I guess 3 things I want to talk to. First, we have upcoming office hours. That is on Tuesday night at whatever that is, the 18th or 17th? 17th at 6:30. Amanda and Maya are going to be there along with Tim and Allison. But just for people that haven't attended those, they're actually a great forum. Unlike school committee meetings, you can actually have interactive, it's very interactive, casual opportunity to really ask questions, hear from others, and just kind of interact and answer any of your open questions. We found it, I think we implemented it 2 years ago, and it's been very successful. So I encourage any resident who wants to come, please come. It's going to be in the PD room in Central Administration, which is in the high school. You can actually enter through the other side of the building. And we also sent out an email communication a few hours ago. If you do want to participate, we ask that you just fill out the simple Google form telling us that you're going to come. But if you get to do that, you can still come. We're not maintaining attendance. Second piece, and you may talk about this budget, but I'll just say we attended the Finance Commission meeting. We'll probably talk more about that. It went very well. It was very informal. Tim did an introduction, gave a little bit of his priorities. There were some questions, but I think overall the feedback from the Finance Commission was very supportive as well. And finally, before we go to the other updates, I do just want to, as kind of the high school PTO representative, I do just want to, for the community, Amy may weigh in here in a minute as well, but let me just weigh in on kind of a really amazing learning and leadership event that's occurring at the high school. What we have going on is the Westwood High School is going to be hosting an internationally renowned traveling exhibit, Anne Frank, A History for Today. This is coordinated by the Anne Frank House, and it tells the story of Anne Frank in the context of the Holocaust and the Second World War, and it connects with present-day experiences and stories. A really great opportunity. I think it's also very exciting, and it's going to be, all students are going to go through it during the course of October and November, and we're also hoping to have some community opportunities, maybe a day or two where the community can come in and actually see it as well. So it's really amazing. And also finally, probably the coolest thing, at least I think, is we're going to have trained student docents help guide the student groups through the exhibit. So truly authentic learning, meaningful learning experiences as well. So I think it's really great. I think to thank Amy and her team for helping lead this. And I don't know if you have anything else to add there. No, she's very good with that. Okay, so thank you for leading that. I just wanted to tell the community because, particularly because there's going to be opportunities for the community to attend as well. Just mark that down and look for communication.
When is that happening?
The community,
Start
yeah.
Monday.
Oh, wow.
And part of the training is actually assembling the exhibit. So like as the exhibit is structured, the students have the experience of doing that on the panel. And October 23rd will be the night and until the next meeting.
Okay. So I don't know if you heard that. October 23rd, stay tuned. For the opportunity for the community to come.
Is it
attend.
just one night?
I think so.
Great. All right. Other reports? I know.
I mean, I gave such a robust one.
It's okay. You don't have to.
We're still building? That's it. That's the
Okay.
update.
I know there's been any other PTO. I know the PTO meetings have started. Any other reports of anything else of note? Fine if there's not. I'm just asking.
I've been to a couple PTO meetings, but I think they're having their usual sort of events.
Okay.
There was a CPAC session last night on mediation. Sue was there as well, which I thought was really well done. It was done by our district representative, or I think it was Metro South representative. And I'm actually the liaison for Legislative Council, but I wondered if you might like to give an update on what the students have been doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So we just elected our freshman representatives, so we've officially kicked off for the year. But right now we're just dealing with minor things that come up, such as the maintenance of the school bathrooms, and we're also looking for this year to tackle something larger. We're again trying to examine our school's environmental impact. So just seeing ways. I know a lot of students brought up, for example, in the cafeteria, maybe some of the materials that are used for the lunch trays or the salad bar, if there's ways of improving that. But we're just looking at ways where we can improve the school's environmental footprint.
Thank you.
Very much.
Okay. Thank you for that. All right, great. We will hand it over to, I guess, the next discussion item is the fiscal 25 budget preview.
Sure. So Lemma and I think, will tag team this. I'm going to take the beginning, and then she'll jump in partway through, and then I'll kind of wrap us up. So we just want to start just initially. This is kind of the jumping off point for some of the discussion. This is our current enrollment in the district. We are maintaining the current practices of class size. You can see that there. I know the committee has seen this previously as well too. But just wanted to show that our enrollment remains relatively stable here as a district, although we have seen a little bit of an increase coming up, and we'll see what the trends will continue as we move forward. But because we are a people business, and the people that we serve our students, as enrollment changes, we need to make sure that we're responsive in our budgetary practices for the students we have in front of us. Just talk a little bit about the budget development process. So we're in October. This is the initial discussion of budget context at this meeting. In November, our cost center leaders prepare their budget requests. In December, we, as a district leadership team, evaluate priorities, develop a proposed budget. That's then presented at the January school committee meeting. Tony had mentioned presenting, well, we would hold our public budget hearing here at school committee in February. The budget would be presented at FinCom, and I do thank the FinCom members for being welcoming the other night. I have always enjoyed going to Finance Committee. I said that the other night. It may make me sick as an individual, but it's something that I enjoy and appreciate their questions and feedback the other night as well too. FinCom public hearings will happen in March, and then town meeting happens in May. I think May. I don't want to say the date. I want to say May. Actually, I don't want to say the date, so I'm not going to say it. But it's in
Mark
May.
your calendar.
Mark your calendar for the date in May the town meeting is. So talking about our budget priorities, and really, budget is a reflection of the values that we have as a district. And so our priorities, these are the main findings of what their main things are going to be informed by. What are our district goals? What are our strategic priorities? Those were approved by the committee in September. I do want to highlight, and this has been a priority on the list for a number of years, about hiring a director of human resources. Not only has that been a longstanding priority, the need for that priority was supported by findings from the district's equity audit this past spring, just as another corroborating factor for that being a need. And I do want to point out, as Lemma talked about in her budget update, the difficulty and challenge in finding support staff and finding IAs and finding cafeteria workers. part of our challenge is that we are limited in what we can do from a recruitment perspective, because the job of human resources is diffused among so many members of our team, and so that ultimately has an impact on kids. And talking with staff, we're seeing what that impact looks like in the buildings, particularly with IAs and ABA tutors and how they support some of our kids that need the most in our buildings. So I just want to highlight that here. It's also going to be informed by the findings of my entry plan that'll be presented in November, and then certainly as part of our conversation tonight, any other priorities that are identified by the school committee. So to talk about some of our annual budget drivers, we obviously have to meet our contractual salary obligations. Those are the obligations that are set forth by collective bargaining agreements or other contracts. We need to meet other inflationary impacted costs. Things are going up every year in the area of transportation, utilities, and other areas. We want to maintain reasonable class sizes that are consistent with the goals of this committee. We need to make sure that we address the special education needs, and that's staying true to our core value that we all have a collective responsibility for all of our kids. And we want to continue to make progress, as I talked about before, in the educational goals outlined in our strategy for district improvement. So moving from there into some specific things for FY24 and FY25, I'm going to turn it over to Lemma, and you can just let me know when you want to advance the slides.
Sure. So first, I'd like to highlight just a couple of the things that we're going to be looking at as we prepare with a district-wide approach and looking at the budget. First, we always, as part of the October tasks for me, we look at our personnel costs and how those might escalate in the coming year. So that is an annual process that we undertake. This year, new is the Pine Hill consolidation. So in the process of preparing for FY25, we will be thinking about what that means for our budget. We'll also be incorporating some additional funding for transportation for ESY. That was a cost that we bore. I mentioned it in the Q report. This summer, we paid for 2 buses to ensure that all students had transportation for ESY, and this is a response to a new regulation. So that was, directly why that change was implemented. I continue to monitor for inflationary and supply chain pressures. We talked about this a lot last year. There's not a lot new, but there will be some that I'll flag later in this presentation. And then there are some increased costs and volatility in special education and some specific capital needs. In terms of personnel, it's important to note that all of our bargaining units, with the exception of custodians, already have contracts settled for FY25, so we know what that will cost us as we predict the budget. We will be entering negotiations with the custodians this winter. We've discussed the labor market disruption, so we continue to find it difficult to fill some roles. That makes it harder to predict what those costs for those staff are going to be because of the churn. If we are forced to use contracted services, that's always a more expensive option. Right now, we've limited that. We only have 2 contractors that are really serving temporary roles. And we hope not to return to where we were last year, where we were more like 9 contractors that we were employing. But if this occurs again, that will certainly have a budget impact because it's a more costly model in general. So that's it for that slide. Then on class sizes, you're familiar with our class size guidelines, but I put them up here for anyone who may be watching and less familiar with those. And I would say that it's always been a priority for us to maintain and to stay within school committee class size guidelines, and that is still the expectation for next year. Over the last 2 years, we've found that it's more difficult to predict class sizes at the early grades, in particular for kindergarten. So that's something we'll watch for. It might make it challenging for us to predict where the teachers will be next year in particular, but this is something to watch. For the Pine Hill consolidation, we're happy that the building is still on schedule. That is a big win for the district. We anticipate that first, when we move in, there will be no consolidation of classrooms. That's been a commitment that we made to students and families. So the students and teachers will move as they are. But next year, as we plan for the new building, there may be a rethinking of how we staff and how we structure our classrooms. So that's something we'll be looking at closely. We also will look at student supports. So that's all the staff that support our students that are outside of their classroom teachers. There may be some efficiencies there or different ways of configuring, and we have yet to see what that will look like. We are in discussion about what our custodial staffing level for that particular building will look like. Right now, for this year, when the building opens, we will simply move the staff that are at Hanlon and Deerfield to Pine Hill. But we recognize that this building has a much larger square footage and footprint, and the community needs in the building will be much larger. There will be many people interested in using the space, so we'll need to staff appropriately. A little bit more detail on the inflation and supply chain pressures that I've observed. First, I wanted to share that we are in year 2 of a 3-year yellow bus contract. The increase for next year is a 3.6%, so that's locked in for us. We are in year 1 of a 3-year special education van contract, and next year's increase is a 6% on that. Otherwise, we're seeing some rising operating costs. I reviewed the budget to see where last year we found it more difficult to stay within budget. And my observation is that service contracts for all sorts of services, including building services like elevators, fire alarms, security systems, all of those prices have escalated over the years, and we haven't adjusted our budget there. We're also observing cost escalation in software service contracts. So I think this is a universal thing. As consumers, we are seeing it, but in school systems are also observing that software services are becoming more expensive. And utilities, we did increase our budget for fuel last year. So as I look at, where we stand so far, we're well within our budget. I mean, we're doing well, but I'll be watching to see whether fuel costs escalate beyond what we anticipated. And fortunately, our electric costs are locked for next year. So we are in a fixed price contract that will protect us. This past week, I think it was, or less than 7 days ago, we received notice about a special education cost increase to anticipate for FY25. So we got a notice from the Operational Services Division to expect a 4.69% increase in our special education private and residential, like day and residential tuitions. This is on top of the 14% increase that we talked about a lot last year, and that had a very significant impact on our budget. That is going to be a challenging one to address, and I anticipate it could be in the realm of $75,000 if all of the tuitions stay what they are today. But tuitions change and students' needs change, so that could shift a lot. We are observing to see what move-ins and changes in student needs will be identified this year. That's a regular part of our process. We continue to see an increase in mental health needs of students or continued patterns of needs, and otherwise I've addressed the ESY transportation requirement. So those are some of those highlights. I think everything on this slide I may have quickly touched on. I've mentioned to you that we are within budget on tuition so far, and in our contracted services we're doing better than where we were last year. But this line, over the last 4 years, we've discussed the opportunity to make a structured adjustment to the contracted services line in student services. So as part of our budget process, we may discuss that again as a team and determine whether or not it's appropriate to do that in FY25. The only adjustment we've made so far was once in FY22, and otherwise we've deferred and deferred. And those are the key highlights, I would say.
Yeah, and then the last thing I just want to finish off, I opened the meeting talking about some of our capital needs, and so I'll highlight here again the facilities master plan to inform the district capital strategy that has to include an educational vision component that's core, and that needs to identify long-term plans for Sheehan and Thurston. This is the part of the meeting where I'm going to put up a number that, because the number is there, and I believe in naming the thing. So the current estimate for a new Sheehan construction would be $70 million. That is based upon the fact that Doran Whittier, when they did the feasibility study for Pine Hill, examined the possibility, like what would the cost impact be of a new Sheehan school the way that it is right now. I had worked with Doran Whittier to escalate those numbers into 2023 construction costs, and that's the number that I got in return related to that.
Tim, just to clarify,
Yeah.
so Doran Whittier did two things, right? They did, how much would it cost to fix Sheehan? But then we separately contracted with them to actually do a test study, a test site for Sheehan, and they came up with different scenarios and, you know, whether or not we could fit a building. Is this what is this 70 million?
This is based upon a new construction, not a renovation of Sheehan.
So did they use what they had provided earlier to determine that?
They had, yeah, they had
Okay.
used their previous work and then escalated that work to today's construction
Okay,
numbers. Yeah.
got it.
No, thank you for that clarity. I
Yeah,
appreciate it.
thank you.
Yeah. And in addition, and as I mentioned before, in terms of capital needs, we have a $1.1 million annual capital allotment, and we have needs that are in excess, you know, as of this moment, that are in excess of that amount. $1.9 million for improvements in the Thurston heating system that could be phased over 2 years to minimize disruption teaching and learning, $2 million for targeted replacement for the moisture study at the Thurston roof, and $2.5 million of high school roof restoration, which could be implemented in phases. This does not include the roofing needs at Sheehan, which would not be part of an FY 25 or further capital ask, because we're able to address that through our existing capital reserves for roofing. So it's not part of this presentation, but I don't want people to leave this thinking, oh, we don't need to do anything with Sheehan's roof. It's just not part of the budget planning because we do have funds to be able to do that. So,
Sorry, one more.
well, this is the end of the presentation, so I was about to ask for questions anyway. So,
The high school roof, Lemma, last time we talked about this, I think we had said that we had some immediate needs for about 500,000. Is this 2.5 million, where did that come from?
So the 500 was a phase of it. So this
Okay.
is the total, like, we would do it over a 3-year period potentially.
Okay,
And the section that is most urgent is that 500,000, so that would be year one of a high school ask. So potentially that could be a single article at town meeting, you know, if we chopped up the high school project into multiple years. And it's conceivable that you can do it that way. There's still a good amount of work that we have to do to think about whether that's the best approach and how to design the contract and,
Yeah.
you know.
so
put this out
similar
to
how
bid.
we put on articles for like the high school auditorium last year, and
Exactly.
we could do the roof for that.
Could do it in those kinds of nugget sizes so
Yeah.
that it's more manageable and so that we can complete a piece in the summer.
And Sheehan, we would use the reserve, the roofing reserve that we have, so, okay, got it.
Would the Thurston roof project, would that be able to be phased over multiple years, the 2 million?
It could be, I'm not sure I would. I think Thurston, the real phasing that we have to do is for the HVAC systems. And I think Thurston is used less in the summer. So we could potentially just take on a pretty big roof replacement project and try to do it in 1 year there.
yeah, I mean, I just to add to sort of this conversation, right? And again, not to belabor the point of a planning study, right? But I think part of the reason to be able to strike while the iron is hot, and I didn't talk about this as part of the presentation before, is that if we are able, for example, to be part of a special town meeting, get funding, begin that work, we're then positioned a year from now, next fall in the FY26 budget cycle, to be implementing. Because we know then, okay, we can answer those questions about can this be phased? How long can we haul along with what we have versus whatever from a long range perspective, right? I mean, the number one thing we need to make sure that we do is anything that impacts the safety in the building, that can't be deferred or delayed, right? That needs to be addressed immediately, and so we need to be able to answer those questions. But that's again, you know, Lemma's sort of I mean, not to put words in your mouth, but
Yeah.
I hear you speculating
Yeah.
because we don't have those answers yet because it hasn't been fully vetted
Yeah.
in that regard, so.
And where do things stand with the MSBA? I know, you know, we're not necessarily in a great position because we're still working with them. And then I've read a lot recently about kind of inequity of the program in general, which leads me to believe that maybe they wouldn't be as eager to support another one of our projects. So I don't know, like, are we still hopeful for that? Are we still going to keep submitting? Or
Yeah, so I think the answer to both those questions is yes, we are still going to be hopeful. And whether that's warranted hope or not is another question. And there's no reason why we wouldn't keep submitting.
Yeah.
At the same time, I think as part of that master planning process, we need to look at what does life look like without the MSB as a partner, and what are the financial implications of that? Because there are other communities that are doing that because the MSBA process, while they are a great partner, and we thank them for everything they've done here in Pine Hill, and they not just in their support, but also in the checks that they're writing to us. But it is a process that takes a little bit longer and costs a little bit more. And so there becomes an analysis of, are we able to, and you have to wait to get in. So there becomes an analysis of not just what is the cost of the project itself, but what's the opportunity cost lost by delaying until you're in the pipeline. So, and again, these are, the funding mechanism for any of these things are beyond obviously just those of us in this room, right? Those are larger conversations that we need to have with the town. How does this fit in with other projects in the town? Where does, where does that all go together? But we need to know the answer to those questions and what the implications are from a long-range perspective. And so, I have had recent experience in a master plan development process that looked at what does this look like with the MSBA, what does this look like without the MSBA, and so that can certainly be something we would consider whether or not we want that to be part of our conversation as we develop this plan.
Do you have any more intelligence on the accelerated repair program? I know it's coming back in January, but any more intel beyond that?
It's been pretty quiet on that
Okay.
front. It's something I can look into a little bit more and see if I can use some of my folks that are out there to get some answers to that questions.
Okay.
But I don't know right
Because
now.
in theory, roofs and heating could.
Yeah.
It used to be in the old days at least.
Yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
and I would be hopeful that they still would be, but there's also a question of, because it's been dormant for a long time, how much backup is there to get access to those funds right now or how much competition is there to get access to those funds? So.
Other thoughts? I guess the other question we typically do at this meeting is, we talked about the HR director as being a priority. Are there other, as they go into budget cycle, anything else that you think, from a school committee perspective, obviously they have to work, that think might be potential priorities?
There was mention in Tim's presentation about the increase in mental health needs, and I know that we, over last year, increased staffing with the adjustment counselors and I think another psychologist. So I'd be interested to hear more about what's needed and if that's something that should be considered.
I appreciate it. I think my initial reaction, I mean, Sue Maselli is I just want to thank Sue for coming in and having a great set of eyes on everything and has been a great thought partner to us. We both come into the district. It's something we talk about regularly. So while we're not ready for prime time yet, that's certainly part of our considerations. Yeah.
Any other thoughts? Well, I have two, of course.
Yeah.
The first one is actually more, I know we depleted the special ed and we got some money back in, given some of the free cash flow at the town. I know there's a lot of needs in the capital. It's always good to continue to replenish that to the extent that we can. And the other thing, and I'm not trying to overwork Josh, but I do want to do a double click on the assistant principal at the New Pine Hill and just see benchmarks on the size of the school versus other towns, in whether or not we can be creative and make it, if that's a full-time. I just want to be, conscious of, again, not I want to overwork Josh, but I just want to be conscious of kind of, administrative positions versus as well.
Yeah, I just sort of my initial reaction to that too is I think it's important that we look not just at the size of the school, but also what is the programming within the
Fair
school,
enough,
right? I mean, we're moving programs into Pine Hill as well that have a significant with students with significant needs, right? And so that has to be a part of the equation.
Yeah, fair
also.
enough, fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, anything else? All right.
I think anything in the moment, but that doesn't mean I won't.
Yeah, of
Later,
course,
and I'll
yeah,
reach
yeah.
out to
Plenty
you.
of time for it.
Yeah.
Well, it's early, I think it was just
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah.
We years ago started doing this early, just because it's helpful to get earlier rather than
Great,
later,
no,
obviously.
that's great. It's good to get the juices flowing.
Here we are.
Actually, this is a slightly boring presentation because not a ton looks all that different from last year. But I thought there was some kind of nice news to highlight, so I'll try and move quickly. You've seen the memo version. This is the slideshow version. And then any questions you have. I want to take just a brief moment to talk about context and to say that the 2023 MCAS scores are really the second year of testing in a row where we have comparable data. So if you remember, 2021 was really abbreviated. We had this sort of little tiny version of the test, so it was kind of an apples and oranges. And then when you go back pre-pandemic, we were actually looking at the high school level, especially a different version of the test. There was a legacy version, and this is the next generation version. So when you look back at scores, it's a whole different scoring system and things like that. So what's nice about this year is it gives us the starting point for looking at trends over time, okay? Our accountability data was reported this year. It looks great. At the district level, all the schools are making progress toward what we need them to make. We did notice a few things in the accountability data that are worth some more looking. One was about enrollment in sort of more rigorous kind of coursework at the high school and our numbers there. And the second was on absenteeism. So seeing a higher uptick in kind of excessive absenteeism. So those are things we can kind of get our arms around. All right. One thing to keep an eye on. So this is coming news. There is, as if there's not enough assessment out there, we have another one coming. They are going to do a full statewide pilot of an 8th grade civics test this year. It's a multi-part test. The first part involves some responding to some prompts with some sort of selected choice and some writing pieces. And it focuses on one of several different sort of curricular strands within that civics framework. The second part is just all kind of selected choice, so multiple choice type questions. We will be engaging in the pilot. The state has been a little fuzzy on, does every student do the pilot? Did just some students do the pilot? So we'll have more news to come about that in the days ahead. It is a lot of testing in 8th grade. So this means our 8th graders will have math, science, English, and a civics test. So, you know, feed them well. I'm not even sure what to say about that. I'm hopeful maybe someday we can spread the love out a little bit. Also coming, not this year or next, but the following year, there's going to be a change, an uptick in the graduation requirements. That's the competency determination. So students at the high school level have to hit a certain threshold in order to receive a high school diploma, and those thresholds are going to start to slowly ramp up over time. This isn't something that we worry about too much because we do a really nice job getting everybody there. However, I just want to forecast for you that's coming. It could cause a little worry. I'm going to tell you right now, don't worry. I think we got it. We'll be fine. Okay. A few big picture highlights. The high school, when you look at sort of just big picture achievement, how many students made it into the meeting or exceeding expectations bucket in every content area. So science, math, and English, the percentages ticked up slightly. So it was nice to see. Grade 3 to 5 just kind of continued to be strong overall. It was sort of like up a little bit, down a little bit in different grade levels and different content areas, but when you look at the comp data, which I'll show you shortly, very, very strong. One really nice piece of news I saw was in 6th grade in particular. Grade 5, as you know from last year, was fantastic. And 6th grade actually did really well as well. I don't know if, you know, those of you with 5th and 6th graders have just like done something right. I can't tell if it's something special about those
totally
kids.
have.
Yeah, we have.
But I do think it's really nice news. And we saw it in both English and math. And I have a particular slide to show you around 6th grade math. It's kind of fun. 5th and 8th grade science really strong too. The high school also jumped up from its previous year. So those are the big picture. Just a reminder, when we look at our comparative data, I kind of look at these 3 different buckets. There's tech districts, which are kind of geographically in our bucket, and we share resources and programming and kind of our collective negotiating power with them. The DART districts, those change year to year, and they're districts that the state determines are somehow similar to us demographically and structure-wise. They don't tell us their secret formula for making this determination, but you know, they do put the data out, so we take a look at those. And then I think the third bucket is the one that people care the most about. You know, when you think about those districts that have a reputation for high performance, how do we look when compared with those? So all 3 of those I kind of put in the mix. And some of these groups are in multiple places. So a little more detail on elementary. Very strong overall performance at the elementary school. We are looking closely to see the impact of some curriculum changes over time. We're going to really be interested in this coming year in terms of data. We've done some things to sort of shore up our foundational literacy in the early grades, and that's in response to things that are going on throughout the state and nation. And in addition to that, we're in the early years of a kind of new edition of the core math program that we use. So we want to sort of keep monitoring, make sure things are continuing to go well there. Some areas that we saw for improvement this last year were really specific in different content areas. So in math, measurement and geometry were places that were a little bit weaker. We weren't really surprised by that because those are areas that we de-emphasized during the year we came back from the pandemic. We had less instructional time, a lot of catching up to do, and people really leaned into kind of numeracy and proportional thinking skills, things that they thought were going to make more of a difference as kids went on and were harder to make up for later. But we want to get back on track with those. In English, interestingly, vocabulary and context is one, and idea integration in reading is another. And the way these come up are actually not in the writing portion of the test, but in the sort of selected response portion. So our kids are doing relatively strong work when they write. When they're just picking out answers, they're relatively weak. You might be tempted to think we don't really care about multiple choice. I could see why that would be an impulse. I think it's actually important to pay attention to, in part because some of this drives to reading comprehension. So we want to really, continue to watch that and make sure we're doing a good job with all of it, right? And in both content areas, thinking about how kids are navigating the test itself, Some of these students just have less practice with this stuff, so making sure we don't want to spend a ton of time on practice for practice sake, but everybody should be familiar by the time we get there. All right, so here's what it looks like. In English, the green is Westwood, and everybody else is in the mix there.
So this is all three groups.
All three comp groups lumped together.
Okay.
Yeah.
Massachusetts, yeah.
And Massachusetts is you can usually find them. That's it. So but it does give you a sense of when you think about Westwood compared to the overall average of the state. Okay, so third grade again, strong overall performance and very close to the sort of top of the heap in terms of the comps. Fourth grade. In the mix. And then fifth grade was, like I said, I don't know, something, it's like, we do have really extraordinary teachers, so I want to give them a real shout out too, but fifth grade's looking great. That's for English. For math, we see sort of similar kind of pattern of results. Third, fourth, and then fifth. Okay. And as I said before, all of these are within kind of a 5 percentage point, many of them just between 1 or 2 percentage points of last year's scores. So we didn't see wide variation from last year to this year, either positive or negative with elementary. Okay. And science, continuing to be right up there too. I think they were up in the hunt last year too. I think the middle school was sort of the fun part for me, especially in sixth grade. So when you look at some of the middle school scores here, we're seeing, compared to where things were a couple of years ago, some really nice things when you look at comp data, especially. One thing we're looking at closely at the middle school is we're rolling out a full pilot of a new math program. We want to sort of see how that impacts. Interestingly, sixth grade really, I think, dove into that last year more than any other grade, and that is the grade where we saw these kind of neat results. So I'm hopeful that that's more than just correlation, that there's something causal going on there. We'll see. Focus areas for improvement, data and statistics and geometry and math, and then shifting over to more writing and idea development in English. And poetry came up as a weakness both at the middle and the high school, which I know. I'd love us to do more poetry. I know maybe I'm in the minority in that. So here's the sixth grade among comps. It's really, really nice to see. Seventh grade English and eighth grade English, all in the mix. Sixth grade math. Seventh grade math, and 8th grade math, and 8th grade science. And this one I wanted to really show you. This is 6th grade math this year versus 2021. I think we had a 50% meeting and exceeding in 2021 versus 76% now. So really kind of nice to see that change over time at the middle school. Thank you. At the high school, I just wanted to point out we had just this sort of uptick in all three areas, like I said. It's nice when it's sort of consistent across all the bands. So not huge jumps, more in science, which is great to see too. We talked about focus areas for improvement, and this is an interesting project when we think about the math test, especially at the high school level. One of the things the math department really tries hard to do is to pick something not necessarily the thing that shows up as the biggest gap, but the thing that shows up as a gap with the state and matters in math, right? Something that's going to help them over time. Sometimes the math test has questions that might vary year to year that aren't really in a bucket of useful math that kids are going to build on over time. Comparison of functions is a really important critical math skill. We want to dig into that one. So. And English, interestingly, poetry, and then they did well in comparing pieces of writing, but contrasting they didn't do as well. So that was an area that they identified for improvement in terms of curriculum. Okay. So here's English. And I always like to point this out, but one of the things you can see at the high school level is that just how flat the graph is. As kids go through, the scores sort of all start to converge at around the same area, at least among similar districts to Westwood. Math and science. Am I formatting my graphs now? All right. Kind of looking ahead, kind of what happens now. The departments kind of dig in, really take that information, and it's much more detailed from each department head. Look at where we did well, where we have room for improvements, and where we can really think about teaching and learning, not just test prep, but really what are the implications for us in terms of curriculum, in terms of instruction, and work with departments on that. We have new intervention support models at both the middle and the high school that we're really excited about. At the high school level, it actually involved taking some positions and reallocating them into supports in math and English. And, you know, Amy would be more articulate about it than I would, but it's teachers who are experienced in those content areas working alongside other teachers, so doing sort of push-in support, as well as helping students during sort of pull-out time and intervention time, running, you have Math Plus back up and running too. So I think it's really going to be incredible what happens for kids who need a little extra kind of push-up. Part of that is in response to the math review where we talked about kids, not just kids who were in more significant need, but kids who are sort of on the fence between levels, kids who needed just a little bit of extra help to kind of get to the next thing. And I think we're optimistic this is going to help with that. At the middle school, they're really taking a highly structured approach to a systemic kind of intervention model where they're looking at STAR data, pulling kids in groups and running them through 6 to 7 week cycles where a small group meets with a teacher to kind of hone in on specific skills. So we're going to see that, and that's something we've kind of done at the elementary school for years. So seeing they've kind of dabbled with it, they really have it off and running this year. So we're excited about that too. In K-5, some new assessments, both literacy assessments that we're doing early to try and identify where kids' needs are, as well as the math team got together and sort of rewrote some of the assessments to make them more aligned so that just we have a better chance of identifying needs more quickly and responding more nimbly. We are going to start sending home proactively the STAR parent reports, K-8, later in the fall. We just got to get the printouts rolling and figure out the logistics of doing it. We've done the first wave of that, and really that's an effort to help parents sort of partner with us around student needs and just get a little more information from us. We don't want to make a huge deal out of it because it's one small thing among many things that we do to look at student achievement, but we also feel like we want people to know kind of how those look and what we can all be doing to help kids. And then finally, as soon as we have more information about civics, we'll let you know what that looks like, and hopefully it won't be too terrible. That's it.
Questions, comments?
I think that the charts, first of all, are very helpful, so
Yeah.
thank you. I think it would also be helpful, and I don't want to throw charts at your desk, but you know, to see the one where you showed sort of 21 to 23,
Yes.
but to see that more broad, you know, just so we understand what's our trajectory.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Are
we
we
can
on the right path? Should we pivot anywhere? I think
Absolutely.
that would be helpful.
Absolutely. I can definitely provide that now. I think one of the things, as I said, we really only have 1 year of comparative data that feels quite right.
Yeah.
You know, the 21 versus 23, that 21 was a limited test. It was still the next
Yeah, I
generation
remember
test, but it was a
that.
limited amount.
Yeah.
So that might have just been like we got the wrong questions to the wrong kids in that 1 year. But I think we'll have a better sense moving ahead and be able to do that more robustly for ourselves and for the wider community. So
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful as well.
Good.
But I mean, the comps are very helpful too. but
Yeah.
That too sort of.
I like they put the test in context of
Yeah.
everybody in the
Right.
in the
Well,
universe.
because you
Kind
keep
of.
hearing these horror stories, you know, throughout about how all these kids have really suffered, particularly at the elementary level, because of COVID.
Yeah.
So it does help put it in context.
Yeah, I think so.
I remember last year too, I feel like it was the grade 6, or no, the grade 5, that we were really sort of blown away by some of the results, right? And so I'm thinking those would be the grade 6
Yeah.
students now, so it would be interesting to sort of track over time. You
We
know,
do
if-
look at cohorts over
do?
time. We don't
Okay.
talk about that in
Yeah.
public session as much, just because they're just different.
Right.
Different
I know there's
configurations
a lot
of kids. Yeah.
data analysis paralysis, but I'm just,
Yeah.
I remember it from last year and thinking, oh, okay, and now here we're seeing that continued trend,
Yeah.
which is positive.
Yes.
Because they're heading into the middle school,
Absolutely.
so.
Other questions or thoughts? I have to highlight the 6th grade. I've been on the committee 8 years, and these are I've never seen the middle school be top 10 in the state. So I know
exciting.
we've invested a lot in the middle school and we changed the schedule. We've invested a lot in department heads. So I just want to highlight, I mean, it's all good, but I think I just want to highlight that one because that's definitely, hopefully that trend continues. That's
I hope so
great
too.
to see.
Yeah,
so.
no, I am really optimistic. I think given the investment that they're making in some of the supports, but also really thinking about curriculum, and that's, we'll see how all that goes. Yeah.
Can I ask one other question?
Sure.
Just for our learning. So when you get something, you say, so we have these findings, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you quickly pivot and get that, say in the elementary school, how do you quickly say, vocabulary and context is a challenge? How do you, I'm just curious,
How do
is
you
it
get
PD?
that? Yeah.
Is it, how do you?
Yeah, I mean, so at the elementary school, we really rely a lot on the specialist team,
Okay.
the sort of coordinator and the specialist to kind of get information out. And a lot of times we are both focusing on thinking about how we coach, how those folks work with classroom teachers to sort of bring those things to the forefront. But if they're, a lot of the elementary issues are more incremental. At the middle and high school, we have department time where we can really sit down and kind of dig into it together.
Okay.
We'll be watching elementary, though. I know there's a lot of stuff out there in the universe about reading and kind of thoughts about what should happen in terms of different reading programs. We are a district using a program that's sort of, falling out of favor, so we want to watch that really carefully. We also don't want to pivot too quickly away from things that are working, at least in part, so we got to sort of monitor. So it's a position of not being overly attached to what we do and also not throwing it out the door just because somebody else said so. So it's, thanks.
Thank you, as always.
Welcome.
Thanks,
Allison.
Allison.
I know you will.
All right, what we've all been waiting for. So just as context, the calendar, we did put it on the action items. If we need more time, we can always move it to November, but we can, if we wanted to vote on it, we can obviously vote on it today. There is a calendar that Harley, thank you for helping put together. So I guess I can do this. So just, I guess, just refresh on context for years ago, I think in 2017, we put in place this rule of thumb around Labor Day, around if it's a early Labor Day, we start after Labor Day. If it's a late Labor Day, we start 2 days before, right? So that's the context. And so I think in considering last year we kind of broke from that. I think given Juneteenth, now is just, we all have to celebrate it, but it's kind of complexity. And also, we just thought it made sense given the calendar to kind of break from that. So I think the question last month we teed up was around, do we kind of think about for next year's calendar and maybe permanently potentially going to the kind of the model of 2 days before Labor Day for students and then 4 days for staff. And these are, I think, some of the considerations. What's best for learning, which, Allison or somebody who knows more about this than me could speak to. Consistency, is it better to have just one consistent for parents and staff? What are other districts doing? And we can share that in a minute. Staff and parent considerations. We've gotten some input from the WTA. And then I think I talked to historical. And so those are considerations, and maybe just flip to the, Harley helped put this together. This is what people did, other tech districts did this year. So most, all except, I guess 2, started basically similar to us, or at least all, 2 or 3, whatever the number is. So that was just additional context. So not that we don't know what they're going to do next year, but at least we know what they did this year. So that's I guess I'd be interested in thoughts from the committee. And so the question again is just focused on really on next year's calendar. Do we start before or after Labor Day? And there's a version that Harley sent that I think starts before.
Display that, or no? It's up to you.
You can, or I don't think you need to display that. People have it in their packet, so.
So this came up at a PTO meeting I attended, and, I said at the meeting that personally, I am in favor of always starting before Labor Day. I think that there's a lot to be said for consistency. I think our policy was confusing. Yeah. And we also didn't necessarily stick to it, right? And so I think a lot of parents, when you're trying to plan the summer, anyway, I think consistency is very, I also found as a parent, and I don't know if others had this experience, but I found it much harder to find care at the end of August, right, when all of the kids were back in college. Absolutely. And so that one extra week kind of killed me. Mm-hmm. Whereas, in June, programs seem to start up earlier. So I think that, personally, I think it would be helpful too. And I also like that the kids are getting out earlier in June, and kids can go to camp sooner or start summer jobs sooner or do what they want to do. So for what it's worth, I think I would be in favor of starting, always just saying we're going to start before Labor Day. I mean, this year I think Labor Day is fairly early, and it still feels like the right time to start. Right. So, anyway, that's what I think.
I have to say, I completely agree. I mean, I think the consistency piece is helpful for families with their summer planning, yep, right? But I also think what I've heard from a number of families, and I know we said that we did a survey and people were split, but the opportunity to have almost like a preview for a couple of days is helpful for some populations of students and families, and that's just appreciated, and it feels less stressful. It's like a gentle lead into the school year. So those first couple weeks are so tumultuous for a lot of kids and for parents. So, I think it's just nice that you have a trial run almost for a couple of days.
Yeah, so. There's less pressure on those 2 days. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah. I also think at the end of the calendar year, there's not, let's all admit it, there's not quality learning going on that last couple of weeks. They're all just eager to be done. So when I think about the calendar, the sooner we can be done, and if we were to start after Labor Day, that pushes us, further into that 1, 2, 3rd week of June, which really just feels like a long time to continue on, especially with the Juneteenth holiday in the mix.
They are predicting a lot of snow this winter.
I was gonna
So,
say,
I could throw out an academic consideration,
Yeah, go ahead.
I would like to hear
which
that.
is the APs are
That would
are
be
a factor
helpful.
that people think about.
Yes, can you say more about that? I was talking with somebody about that this week.
Just the schedule, often those are big curriculums. There's a lot of work to get through, especially with some of those sort of higher test ones, BC Calc and things like that. Having a couple extra days running start at it can be helpful for students. So in thinking about our juniors and seniors who are really looking to maximize that for their college credit, and given the cost of college nowadays, it feels like a nice thing for them too.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, right? I mean, they're not competing against just students in Massachusetts, but elsewhere in the country where,
Yeah.
you know, they start school in August to start football season, like at the beginning of August, right? So, as much of a head start as we can give our kids here, I think, is helpful and valuable.
Because Allison, that test is in mid-May, right?
The APs are kind of
Early,
sprinkled
yeah.
throughout May. They're actually pretty early. Yeah.
Sean can probably answer that question better than anybody here at this table, so.
You know, I would say from an AP standpoint, like absolutely. You know, I remember in a couple of classes, like being told, like, okay, we're already behind the people in California, people in Texas, and we really just have to speed through the material. So, I think having that little extra bit of buffer at the beginning of the year is helpful, and it also reduces the time after when you're done with the exam, and you don't really have much curriculum to do afterward too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think we have a consensus here. Anything else on the calendar? Okay.
Specifically, the calendar that's been proposed, I would love to see that final date be on the Friday of the week prior, if we're looking specifically. But if we're not looking, if we're just getting thoughts, then we can save that for a different discussion.
What do you mean
So right now, this proposed calendar 2025 puts the last day of school without snow days on June 16th.
Yeah,
Would
I
it
mean,
be?
my initial comment on that is we can't do that without eliminating a holiday.
Yeah.
Because we have to have 180 days, and so
Right.
that is literally a count of 180 days. So.
Is it, so that's the conversation of, for example, on this, and again, I don't know if we want to drill down in these
Yeah.
specifics, so.
Well, we're gonna,
Gonna vote on it.
We're gonna vote on it, so yeah, we're voting on this.
So, refresh my memory, I didn't know that the election day was this all district-wide closing. I know it takes place now consolidated all at the high school. Is that a day that we could consider not closing through the district?
So so we should have mentioned that. So basically what we've agreed to, so it's basically what we agreed to with the town clerk, even though they consolidated, is that in years where there's a federal election, particularly a contentious federal election, but any federal election, we actually move the professional development day that's typically the day after Thanksgiving to that day. So it doesn't
Okay.
actually, we basically eliminate the Monday after Thanksgiving that we have off this
Tuesday.
year, and we get it off the Tuesday, but it doesn't give us any more days.
Got it.
Right? So
Got it.
that's kind of the challenge there.
I know this doesn't have the short Wednesdays on here, or at least if I.
Yeah, we always typically do that later.
Okay.
I mean, typically,
So
yeah.
I guess I would just ask if, when we're coming up with the short ones, and I don't know what the formula is. Honestly, I've tried to figure it out and correlate it with my work calendar, and I can't. So I just put them in one by one. I did hear feedback from a couple of people that this particular year in November, it seemed to be really heavy on, between the days off and the short Wednesdays, it felt imbalanced, I guess. I just wondered if we could take that into consideration when looking at next year.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Well, one other consideration is the Friday of Labor Day. Could we make that a half day in order to?
I think
That's contractual.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, just one comment I will make is that we would end that Monday assuming we had no snow days next year.
Right.
The odds that we have 0 snow days
Or
may,
zero- yeah,
may not
some
be
sort
high.
of
I mean, I'm a kid from Buffalo, so my threshold's a little higher, but
Well,
I
and-
can't promise that. So
And that's part of my thinking about this is that, it only really allows us 2 snow days before we hit the Juneteenth. And then that means that, we could, if we had 5 snow days, we could go into that 4th week of June. And that just really feels late into the year.
I don't think there's anything we can do
there's no flexibility, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think
We have
it's,
to get the
it's
days
the
in, and then
180
it's the
days.
contractual.
So
And we
the-
can't
days off.
start before.
we can't start,
No.
we can't start Tuesday or Monday of that week and have the teachers report the week before?
Contractually. no.
Contractually.
It's that Monday before.
Yep, it's the Monday before.
And they might riot beside that, so.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's sort of, it is what it is with the way the calendar's falling.
Okay. Yeah, no.
Other thoughts, questions? Okay, seeing none, so we can move into action items. The first action item is approval of the September 14th, 2023 meeting minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Second, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None, the vote is unanimous. The next one is the approval of the Westwood High School Model UN field trip. I don't know if there's anything else, I think the memo was in there, so, do I have a motion to approve the field trip?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. All right. Unanimous. Finally, approval of the 2024-25 school calendar. I just want, before I do that, are we okay moving forward with voting on it? Do we need more time? Okay. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
The second? Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? None. Unanimous. Finally, any new business? Anything people wanted to raise? Okay, great. Finally, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
Thank you.